The topic for today is Symantec Data Insight, and the question of the webcast, the exact title, is something like, whose data is it? So we'll talk about data ownership, Symantec DLP, and data insight. So our agenda for today, the problem, we'll talk about what the problem is within Network Discover or data at rest. We'll talk about the products, how to solve, what products we'll be using, the solution, and how they work together. So what we're looking at right now is a Symantec Data Insight, or sorry, Symantec DLP incident. And the arrow going right here to this built-in /administrators as being the file owner. So Symantec Data Loss Prevention can help us determine the data owner. Well, great. Is the real owner of this product built-in /administrators? If I need to resolve this file, remediate this problem, who do I go to? Who is built-in /administrators? You know, who in the company is responsible for that? Or how do I deal with built-in /administrators? What happens if in a data loss prevention incident I get an orphan SID? Who do I then deal with? What is file ownership? Boy, it sounds like I'm a little bit of a philosopher asking some deep questions here. What is file ownership? Who owns the file? Can we really own files? How do we go about answering that question, right? Built-in administrators, orphan SIDs, who's using that file? Well, Symantec Data Insight will help us answer those questions. So the software that I'm going to talk about today, quick overview of Symantec DLP. I'm going to show a slide. You may have seen it already, so please don't ignore that portion. We're going to talk about Network Discover in depth, and then we're going to move into Symantec Data Insight. What is data loss prevention? It's a common slide. I like to start out with this at the beginning because this really lays the foundation, the framework for the conversation. Where is your confidential data, right? This is the question that we're going to really talk about, these two portions. Where is your confidential data? Okay, I found it. But secondly, how is it being used, right? So I know where my data is, right? It's on the file share. So here at ITS, we have a corporate drive. It's the G drive, right? We dump all kinds of stuff on G. But really, what's on that? Is that confidential data? Is that data that we need to deal with? How is that data being used? Is an intern accessing all of our data that's on the G drive and he or she shouldn't be? How do we prevent that data loss once we know about it? So, data loss prevention, 3 keys. Discover, we'll talk briefly about that. We'll actually walk through DLP, Network Discover. We're going to monitor that data, and we're going to leverage data insight to give us a more in-depth monitoring of that data. And protection allows us to help remediate that file. So, couple of areas, right? Discover, monitor, protect. Find that data where it's stored, create an inventory of sensitive data, and then manage the cleanup. Okay, so how does Data Insight help me answer this discover? Okay, well, how are you going to manage the cleanup of that data, right? I have hundreds of thousands of instances. Hopefully not, but let's just say I have hundreds of files that need to be cleaned up. Who cleans those up? Who's responsible for cleaning that up? Well, we could leverage a workflow product to notify that data owner. But how do we know the person we're notifying is that data owner, right? That they are actually responsible for that data. Okay, so discover. Find the data. It's all out on our corporate G drive. It's in my Exchange server. It's on my SharePoint server. It's on this SQL database, etc. Okay, so we found it on our corporate drive. How do we monitor that data? Well, how is that data being used? Symantec DLP, the Network Discover, really can't answer that question because we don't know how that file is being used. How do we know that Jonathan Jesse is the person that's accessing that file over and over again? Well, hopefully he becomes the data owner and that shows up in the incident. But what if he was the last person to save that file, but George or Carl or Sally was the people that were actually accessing that file but not saving it? the content in context, okay, we can grab content in context. It's stored on our G drive. It's saved. We can get that all figured out with data loss prevention, network discover. But how do we really know what's happening? And then the final protect portion of that, right? Once we know who's using it, we can enforce our data protection policies. We can prevent confidential data from leaving our network, and we can proactively secure the data. So discover, we're going to talk about network discover, right? The first problem is I need to enable or customize or define what confidential data is. So what is confidential data? Then we're going to run our scan targets. Okay, we're going to find sensitive data on the network and on the endpoint. Awesome, great. We have all of this confidential data. Well, hopefully not, but unfortunately we do. Then who's using that data? Well, with Network Monitor, we can figure out how that data is moving around. But we can also, by leveraging Data Insight, actually monitor file usage. So Carl uses 3 gigs of data a week, or Carl is the person who is using this file. That's great. It's part of Carl's job. But let's make an alert happen if Sally, who is not supposed to be using this data, actually uses it. We'll talk about that. And then protect, actually remediate, clean up that data, move it to an encryption, quarantine that file, notify people, tie it all together with Symantec DLP. So brief overview of DLP, write our policies, run a discovery, monitor how that data is being used, and then also protect that data. And then remediate and report on risk reduction, step number 5. All right, brief overview of DLP. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, jjesse@itsdelivers.com. Would love to spend time having a more in-depth conversation with you on DLP. So what is Data Insight? Well, Data Insight is an add-on product to Symantec DLP, and it helps me answer these really 3 questions or items. Data that is inactive or orphaned, how do I deal with that data? I was working with a customer. They have a policy that says we only retain data that is 5 years older or 7 years older. We only return data for 7 years. After 7 years, it's corporate policy that we remove that data from our file shares. So then the question is, are you? How are you enforcing that policy, that data retention policy? Well, as we can see, and I'll show within Data Insight, we can actually run reports that says that data is not older than 7 years, or this data is inactive after X amount of days. Usage and consumption patterns. So we have Steve here. Steve works for Human Resources, and Steve normally uses X amount of data, 5 gigs of data, or 5 gigs of data for a whole week. Well, something happens, and 1 week Steve is accessing a large amount of data. What's going on with Steve? Is he been on vacation for a while, or is he getting ready to leave and he's taking a whole bunch of data with him? A couple of questions that we can help address within Data Insight. This third and final phrase is the most important and the real benefit in my mind for Data Insight. Who owns that file? Remember, we can build workflows, we can build patterns, we can build reporting based on data ownership, but that data ownership better be valid, right? So I go out to Carl and I say, hey Carl, you have all of this confidential data and you have for 2 weeks to clean this up or we notify your boss. Well, Carl really better be the person behind that data ownership, or it's going to come back on you. So helps me identify inactive data, identify usage and consumption patterns, identify who's the owner of that file, integrates with Network Discover, and then helps us resolve those Network Discover incidences. This is the dashboard for the data at rest portion of DLP. We're looking at the DLP console. So what I have is just a summary. It's got all of my targets, all of my scans, etc. So let's kind of start at the beginning and walk our way through Network Discover. We'll then jump into Data Insight. So starting with the demo of Network Discover. So first thing that I always talk about is my policies. Got to have policies. got to know what our confidential data is that we're generating policies on there. So it looks like someone set up a policy about Red Sox and they might not like them. I don't know. Other people use this demo box, so if you're a Red Sox fan, don't hate. All right, so we're going to be tracking really on PCI information, Social Security numbers, HIPAA, and high-tech related items. So let's take a look at Social Security numbers. This is a policy within DLP, pre-built in, and it's tracking on Social Security numbers. It's generating information when I find it. So Social Security numbers, I can set up a breadth as well, wide, medium, or narrow. I want it to be narrow so it potentially eliminates false positives. And you can see that it's matching a 9-digit number, eliminating common test numbers such as, and also requires the presence of a Social Security related keyword. Well, what keyword is it looking at? If I click on more info, right, it's going to populate all of the information behind this item. So in this case, it's looking for Social Security number, SSN, or SSN pound on top of all of the matching. This is going to really help me eliminate false positives when I run my Network Discover test. So let's go ahead and click OK, and then save them. Once again, a policy drives everything that we find. Once we find data, we can also help remediate it with Data Insight. Let's go ahead and go to our Discover Target so you can actually see what I'm discovering against. I have a bunch of demo data that will be looking at usage with Network Discover, but this demo data on my domain controller, you can see that I've scanned it a couple of times, had some errors, had some files, and let's go ahead and take a look at what we're doing. So I'm going to run a scan, and I can submit this job on a schedule. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll schedule that to happen weekly on Saturday. I'll run it forever, but I also have a backup window at 2:30 to 2:45 every Sunday. So what's going to happen is this scan is going to kick off at 12 a.m. It's going to hit 2:30 and pause, and then move on to 10, and then restart at 2:45. I am going to scan some content using credentials and using my configuration or my shares, and then from there I could also throttle that file. All kind of somewhat boring stuff, but it will give us information, it will give us incidences, and we'll be able to rock and roll from there. So go ahead and save my changes. And if I want to kick this off, I can just hit the play button. All right, brief kind of high-level overview of DLP. Remember it at the Network Discover level, as all parts within DLP, it starts at first knowing what the policy is and moving from that policy to set up my scan for Network Discover, and then I'll get incidences. So let's take a look at some incidences. So I got this email here. I got some problems. This person is actually requesting has a saved email, and that email in their web archive is talking about penicillin and prescription information. So we've got this age-old problem here on the side, built-in /administrators. Well, who's actually using that file, or where does that actual file show up? So we'll take a look at that in the Data Insight section and hopefully really find out who's using that file. I could change this data owner if I wanted to, but what we're going to do is have Data Insight come back and change and populate this information. So go ahead and cancel that information. All right, let's go ahead and jump into Data Insight here, and we'll talk about how Data Insight works. So I got another tab here, and I'm going to log out completely and start from scratch here on this. So there is integration. When I look at an incident, I can actually pull up Data Insight automatically. However, what I want to do is give an overview of the whole console, how I can write a policy, how I can run reports, and some of the awesome information that Data Insight can give me into it. So as you can see, completely integrated with Active Directory. You can also install it with different languages if you need to. I speak English, so I installed just English. So let me log in. My keyboard's a little loud, so I apologize for that. And I want to start at what we refer to as the workspace. So this is the workspace for all of the information. Kind of the overall workspace places where I'm going to do all of my work at. So we asked the question in the PowerPoint, what is data owner? Who is the data owner? Well, how does Data Insight determine that? So let's start there. I'll go to Settings, and I'm actually going to take a look at this data owner policy. So how do I infer, or how do I determine who that data owner is? In this case, I am going to use the read plus write count to infer that data owner. There's different ways you can set this up. So I could say that this was the person who created it, the last accessor, the last modifier, but I'm going to use read and write count to infer this. So once I infer data owner, I can then push that information upstream to the Data Insight field and populate that automatically. Go ahead and save this. And you can see that I right here have Data Insight feeding and configured for data loss prevention. So a couple of things when you set this up, and I have some questions coming in, awesome, is you need to set up this portion of the screen with a user who has access to the reporting API within DLP. So you can see this is my host name of my DLP server, the port that it's communicating over, the username, and then the report ID that generated. So let's flip back because I think there's going to be a question on how did you get that report ID. So let's flip back to DLP for just a second. Go to users here. Now I have not enabled Active Directory integration on this side, so I'll have all local users, my reporting user, and there is a checkbox within the role, wrong location, go to System and Roles, my DLP reporting user, and you can see that I have access to the reporting API right here. This allows me to communicate with the data loss prevention server from Data Insight. Set up my reporting ID. This is all covered within the documentation as well. Get that set up. And then you're like, well, Jonathan, how did you get that report? So let's answer that question. So if I come into this report, I have I created my report to send out to Data Insight, and when you see, if I can hover this down at the very bottom of the screen, I can't pull that up at the same time, but at the very bottom of the screen it says, it gives you a Java message down here at the bottom, and it says saved.81. That is the report ID that I need to put into Data Insight. Once again, it's covered within the manual as well. Alright, so now we have data loss prevention configured, but we also need to set up filers to scan for information. Sorry, let me step back. Active Directory information. It's going to scan for users. It's going to scan my AD, do a query against my domain controller, and give me user group information that I can then run reports against. So I have that set up. I have it set up as the schedule, and it's good to go there. So the next thing that we need to do is to set up filers. So this is what I want the DLP Data Insight system to scan. You're saying, well, what can we scan at Data Insight level? So currently in Data Insight 2, we can scan a NetApp filer, an EMC Solera filer, or a Windows file server. I think I had some questions on if I can scan AIX, AS400, those types of things. From a data loss prevention scan, yes, you can set those up. They do have scanners for that. Send me an email. We can talk offline. But at the Data Insight level, a NetApp filer, an EMC filer, or a Windows file server filer. So I've got two set up, and let's kind of talk our way through here. I am going to be scanning this file server using a saved credential that I've set up, my DLP service account. It is going to scan and collect information for me. And then you can see the shares that it's going to come up against. I do have an error. I think it was a reboot occurred or something. You can see the scans that I'm going to scan. So just my demo data. Because this is my domain controller, I have my net logon and that sys volume as well. I don't really care about those two. It's going to be all in the demo information. I can edit this filer, and what I'm doing is I am scanning this via a local agent. So I can scan information agentlessly, or I can scan the system via an agent as well. And you can see that I have a custom schedule set up. It's going to use a Data Insight agent to do my scanning and reporting on all of the information. Let's go ahead and save this. It's going to yell at me that I didn't verify the credentials, but I do know that they work, and I want to edit and save that information as well. Alright, so we have my AD set up, we have my filer set up, we have a scan set up. So let's go ahead and take a look at what is actually happening in that scan. I'm going to flip back over to the workspace, and I want to go up a level here. So as you can see, this is my whole enterprise that I have set up, and all of the filers that I have configured. So too, I have my domain controller and my other box, my Altiris demo box, but let's go ahead and expand this, and then let's take a look at the demo data. Alright, so I'm going to get a little message about permissions not being inherited. You saw that pop up and leave. Let's go ahead and take a look at an overview. You can see the details, when it was created on, when it was created by. But other items that's real cool, right, is I can see the last accessed by, last modified. I can start getting some user activity, and I can get nice little reports and charts. I have 4 users who've accessed things. I can see how much data they've actually been accessing. If you'd like it in a little tabular view, I can get that as well. We can take a look at folder activity, get some nice little charts and graphs. The permissions, who has access to this. This information is pulled in because I've grabbed my AD information, and I can also grab some audit logs and to get access information based on what's happening, right? Nice little charts, nice little graphs. We can see who's accessing the file, when they started, when they ended, all pulling from in that Windows file share information. Let's kind of expand this for a minute, and let's talk about some other information. I'm drilling now down into a folder. All right, I can see what's happened within that folder, an overview of that folder, the files that have been accessing it, who's accessing it. You can see it's starting to give me some real in-depth information about this system. Now, this is a Windows file share. I would get stuff from my EMC filer, from my NetApp filer, that would give me the same type of information. Alright, so that's awesome, Jonathan. You're getting all kinds of great information. Well, you know what? How does this help me out? So let's take a look at this customer credit card information, right? Created by, last accessed by, last modified on. I can get all kinds of user activity, file activity. Once again, the goal is to get information on who is the owner of that particular file. So what, Jonathan? All right, let's write some policies that are based on it. All right, so we talked about these 3 different areas that DLP can help, or sorry, Data Insight can help us answer. Data activity and user activity deviation. I gave the example of Bob here, right? Bob normally accesses a specific amount of data loss or data. Let's go ahead and say if he deviates from that, right? If Bob deviates from that information, do something, right? So let's call this, first time I created a policy, forgot that little checkbox enable. We'll come back. As you can see, it responds very well. It allows me to create a baseline, and then allows me to say, okay, what's my allowed deviation? 3 times the standard deviation, etc. So let's go ahead and grab this. And what data? Once again, it's pulling that data from my from that filer that I have set up, my user selection. All right, now let's go ahead and find good old Jonathan Jesse, and then we want to add an email to send out an alert. Just go ahead and save that, and now we have a policy for user deviation. So when Jonathan deviates by 3 times standard deviation, that demo data folder, send an alert out. The other things that we can do is do a data activity. Now, I have this folder called Federal Folder. It's a demo. Pull it up here, right? But I want this to be a higher risk folder, right? I have very specific access rights to it. And if anybody accesses it, I want to have an alert. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I have that set up. So it's this Monitor Federal folder here. All right, so Monitor Federal folder. It is a data activity policy. It is high. It is enabled. And what I said is if anybody accesses it greater than 2 times a day, do something, notify me, right? So it's the federal folder off of my domain controller share here. Send a notification and also generate an alert. All right. So I have some alerts. Monitor Federal Folder alert, and it then allows me to resolve this folder and remediate. So I have that alert that I could update the resolution, or I get an email, right? And this email then comes out daily and shows me my activity policies. The next question is, can you customize that? And the answer is yes. You can see exactly what happened within that. Jonathan was a bad guy, violated that policy twice. All right, and you can then remediate and respond to it. Hyperlink will pull me into the DLP console. I'm running the default certificate. I log in, and it pulls up information about that person. Now, let's kind of back up and do a reset. We've talked about data loss prevention, right? I have Network Discover running. It's generating incidences. How do I figure that out? Who's the data owner? Data Insight can help me answer that. How do we set up a policy and alerting within Data Insight? We've covered that. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the reports. One of the concerns that I stated at the beginning is we have a policy that says data older than X amount of days. One of the reports, I'd love to show you this, but apparently the demo gods were not nice to me, is talking about aging and usage, right? So we have a policy that says any files older than 7 years we delete. Well, let's go ahead and through Data Insight run a report. There is an inactive or data usage report. I wish I could pull it up. I apologize. I'll have some homework to do. That we can run, and we can also notify people via email when that report is run, or email them that report and say, look, here's all of the files that violate your data retention policy. Please go out and remediate them. So what is Data Insight answering the question of? Who's the file owner? What my files are, right? So go back to that workspace. Who's using my files? What's that user activity? How do I go about and then alert on that and remediate it? And how are my files being retained? Am I actually cleaning that file retention policy and enforcing it, or do I just have it written down? So if you have any questions, once again, shoot me an email, jjesse@itsdelivers.com. If you want an in-depth demo for yourself or for your team, email me. Thank you for attending.